I'm Gary Freed, Managing Producer at Z-Axis. The video that follows is one of about a dozen informational videos produced by Z-Axis for the FAA in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Airshow Guidelines used computer animation to present some of the key air safety regulations that needed to be followed by organizations putting on air shows. Z-Axis created the animation and edited this 14-minute video that was dated June 1988.
Air shows, the thrill and excitement of professionals showing their skills and sharing information. Since the beginning of flying, air shows have been a fundamental part of aviation. From the early barnstormer solo performances to today's programs of aircraft demonstrations, flying teams, and new technology displays, they have provided the public with an appreciation and understanding of flying. Because of public interest and generally large attendance, airshow sponsors and performers have the responsibility of ensuring that a high level of safety is maintained, starting with the flight rules guiding the operation of aircraft. These rules are contained in the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 91. Since 1971, the authority to grant or deny waivers to these regulations for air shows, aerobatic contests, and air races has been the responsibility of the FAA Office of Flight Standards. The purpose of this presentation is to offer a brief description of the applicable flight limitations and provisions provided in the current FAA Airshow Policy Guidelines. All air shows need waivers on aircraft speed limitations, minimum safe altitudes, or other limitations while operating in the vicinity of airports. Other events might only require permission for aerobatic flight at less than 1,500 feet above the surface. The necessary waivers depend to a large extent upon the airshow location. Let's begin our review by examining a selected airshow site. The sponsors have designated the area of operations for the air show as a cylinder with a 5-mile radius from the airport and from the surface to 7,000 feet. All flight operations conducted under the waived regulations will be limited to this defined area. They've also established a takeoff and landing area and the primary spectator area for viewing the air show. The parking space on the opposite side of the runway has been identified as a secondary spectator area, since it's expected that people will be congregating here to view the show. And it's been noted that there is a congested area to the northwest of the airport. All of these areas will have to be considered when reviewing the planned aerobatics and flyby demonstrations. Notwithstanding the aerobatic flight provisions of FAR Section 9171, an aerobatic maneuver for air shows is defined as one in which the aircraft is either in sustained inverted flight, rolled from an upright to inverted position, or from inverted to upright position. Of course, slow rolls, snap rolls, loops, Immelmans, Cuban 8s, spins, and hammerhead turns are also aerobatic maneuvers and may not be performed over congested areas or over spectators. For all aircraft, steep banked, level, climbing, or descending turns necessary during flight between aerobatics aren't considered to be aerobatic maneuvers. Normal positioning turns for high-performance military aircraft are also not considered to be airshow aerobatic maneuvers. The one regulation that will not be waived, paragraph A of section 91.79, states that no person may operate an aircraft below an altitude allowing, if a power unit fails, an emergency landing without undue hazard to persons or property on the surface. Paragraphs B and C of Section 9179 governing minimum safe altitudes over congested areas, open water, and sparsely populated areas may be waived depending upon specific conditions. For example, the Air Force Thunderbirds and the Navy Blue Angels are issued waivers for altitudes lower than those prescribed for aerial demonstrations. These teams have maneuvers packages describing their normal routines which are submitted to the FAA. Although these packages do not call for airshow aerobatics over congested areas, persons, or spectator areas, the approved maneuvers might include level or climbing non-aerobatic overflights over these areas. In any case, these aircraft can never be less than 500 feet above the crowd. While we're on the subject, other performers must maintain at least 1,000 feet AGL over the spectator areas unless they hold approval from FAA headquarters. Military demonstration teams flying approved ingress or egress routes can also receive special waivers to fly within 200 feet above the highest obstacle, provided it's within 3 nautical miles of the show site. This is not a blanket authority, but applies only to approved routes. Incidentally, there may be more than 1 or 2 routes approved for a show. Generally, all performers may be issued minimum altitude waivers to transition a congested area if the following conditions are met. Prolonged climbs over congested areas shall be continued to at least 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within a 2,000-foot radius of the aircraft. Pilots are expected to climb at a rate consistent with a safe and efficient operation. Pilots are expected to leave the altitude being flown so that a smooth transition may be made to the performance altitude in the area of operations. The descent angle can't be less than that required for a normal landing approach. For aerobatic and certain other flight demonstrations, reference lines called show lines must be established at a prescribed distance from the designated spectator areas. The lines are used by the performer or a formation leader to set up and recover from an aerobatic maneuver. The safety of the performance and that of the spectators is enhanced by the participants' use of a well-defined show line. So it's important to try to use a prominent ground reference such as a runway, canal, breakwater, road, or any straight line that can be viewed from the air. Let's look at 2 examples. In this scene, as the aircraft completes the loop, the taxiway provides an easy visual reference for the pilot to begin his next maneuver. In this second scenario, a fence has been selected as the show line. While it appears to be a good ground-level landmark, it's difficult to see from the air. Here, the pilot has great difficulty in acquiring the fence as a visual reference. The prescribed show line and spectator separation distances are divided according to the following aircraft speed categories. 1. Speeds more than 245 knots. In this case, there must be at least 2,700 feet between the primary and secondary spectator areas. The show line distance to the spectator areas for Category 1 aircraft is 1,500 feet. The designated distance between the show line and spectators can vary somewhat to accommodate physical features such as antennas or tree lines. Depending on FAA performance approval, the closest spectator area distance for Category 1 is 1,200 feet. This reduction applies only to either the primary or secondary spectator area, not both. The minimum spectator area separation of 2,700 feet must always be maintained. 2. Speeds more than 156 but less than 245 knots. For Category 2, the minimum allowable distance between the spectator areas is 1,800 feet. Depending on the physical circumstances, either spectator area can be placed as close as 800 feet. Once again, the permissible distance reduction applies only to one or the other spectator area. 3. Less than 156 knots. The show line may not be closer than 500 feet to either spectator area for Category 3 aircraft. If the site cannot provide a 500-foot distance from the show line to the spectators or 1,000 feet between spectator areas, the location cannot be considered for an air show waiver. This 500-foot show line, by the way, may be used by all aircraft in straight and level flight that's parallel to either spectator area. In the case of aircraft formations, performers must adjust the show line to ensure that the critical aircraft is no closer than 500 feet to a spectator area. Air show sponsors should be aware that 3 different show lines might be required when all categories of aircraft are participating at a show site. A last issue about show lines, which has stirred controversy at more than one potential show site. That's when a congested area falls inside the show line boundary limitations. In our example, the primary spectator area fits nicely within the 1,500-foot requirement for Category 1 aircraft. However, the airport boundary and the houses just beyond fall within the total allowable 2,700-foot requirement for this type of aircraft. Can a show be held here? Probably not, unless the sponsor and local authorities wish to coordinate an evacuation of the houses for the duration of the air show. The point is that some sites may be desirable locations, but because of their proximity to congested areas, are not acceptable show sites. Sponsors should be aware of this before submitting an application for waiver. Spectator areas may not be located closer than 500 feet from the runway area when the normal landing speed of any aircraft exceeds 100 knots. If the entire air show involves aircraft with landing speeds less than 100 knots, and there will be no excessive maneuvering during takeoff or landing, spectators may be located as close as 200 feet. If the takeoff runway is closer than 500 feet to either spectator area, no aerobatics will be permitted for any category of aircraft until it turns away from or passes the end of the spectator area, and then only if there's no congested area or spectators under the aircraft. After an authorized takeoff maneuver, all aircraft, regardless of category, must at least maintain their show line distance for aerobatics. Other distance limitations apply to engine run areas, which must be at least 100 feet from spectators unless protected by a barrier. Helipad areas, which should also be enclosed and located so the aircraft will not pass over spectators during takeoff and landing, and sailplane operations, which can take off from taxiways located as close as 200 feet to the primary spectator area, 150 feet if the takeoff path is at an angle of at least 10 degrees away from the spectators. We're about ready to begin the show. Just a few more points. Performers who have received approval from FAA headquarters can conduct aerobatic maneuvers toward designated spectator areas if 1. The approved aerobatics are completed beyond a point where the rollout and trajectory of the aircraft will not endanger the spectators. 2. Rolling 360-degree turns are completed beyond the required show line separation. 3. Oblique line maneuvers pass spectator areas within the show line limits. We have discussed the federal regulations governing air show performances and the FAA's authority to grant or deny waivers. We also reviewed the conditions under which the federal rules may be waived. Finally, we've examined the minimum distances and maneuver limitations for air shows. While aerobatic and flyby demonstrations can be exciting, stimulating, and informative, they must always be safe. The air show guidelines help ensure that adequate public and aviation safeguards are being taken. Now, on with the show.